I'd worked night security at the public storage off Airline Highway for 3 years when I finally quit. That's how long it took for me to stop pretending the job was normal. The first 2.5 years were fine. Easy, even. I clocked in at 10, made my rounds at midnight and 4, watched the camera feeds between walks, and drank terrible coffee until the day shift guy showed up at 6. The facility had 8 rows of units, all climate-controlled, all accessible from interior corridors. Fluorescent lights that hummed too loud. Concrete floors. The kind of place that felt like a high school after hours. I needed the work. I'd been doing security gigs around Baton Rouge since my mid-20s, and night shifts paid better. This one was quieter than most. No drunks, no trespassers, no real problems. Just me and the cameras and the occasional tenant who showed up at odd hours because they worked weird schedules too. Tim Skinner ran the day shift. He'd been there 8 years when I started, which seemed impossible to me at the time. I couldn't picture spending 8 years anywhere, let alone a storage facility. But Tim liked it. He was the kind of guy who showed up on time, did his job, went home, never complained, never seemed bothered by anything. During my first week, he pulled me aside after the morning handoff. We were standing in the security booth, which was really just a converted storage unit near the front entrance. Desk, monitors, mini fridge, coffee maker that only worked half the time. Tim had his jacket on already, keys in hand. "You been down row C yet?" he asked. I told him I'd walked all the rows during training. "Unit 114, he said. "You see it?" I hadn't paid attention to individual unit numbers. I told him that. He nodded, didn't look surprised. "It's about halfway down on the left. Registered to a woman named Genesis Pearson. She stopped coming around 4 months back, maybe a little more. Autopay's still active, though. Charges every month like clockwork." I asked if that was unusual. "Not really," Tim said. "People forget they're paying for storage all the time. Or they die and the account just keeps running until the card expires." He paused, scratched at his jaw. "Nobody from the facility's been inside since her last visit. We don't have a reason to go in." I figured he was telling me this for inventory purposes or something. I asked if he needed me to check on it. "No," he said. "Just letting you know it's there." That should have been it. But he didn't leave. He stood there looking at me, and I got the sense he was trying to decide whether to say something else. "The guy before you," Tim said finally. "He worked here about 6 months. Quit in January, didn't give notice, just stopped showing up." I asked what happened. "Don't know exactly, but he stopped walking past row C after dark. I'd check the logs, and he'd do perimeter on rows A, B, D through H. Just skipped C entirely for his last month here." I asked if the guy said why. "Nope, didn't ask either." Tim shrugged. Figured he was lazy or spooked by something. Either way, not my problem. He left after that. I didn't think much about it. Plenty of people quit security jobs without explanation. The work's boring, the pay's not great, and some guys just don't like being alone at night. I figured the previous guard had been one of those types. Probably heard a noise, let his imagination run, decided the job wasn't worth it. I kept to my routine. 2 walks per shift, cameras in between. I learned which units had motion-triggered alarms, which tenants came by regularly, which hallways had lights that flickered. Row C was the same as the others. Quiet. Nothing unusual. That lasted until February. It was a Tuesday, I think, maybe Wednesday. The midnight walk? I always started at row A and worked my way back, checking doors, looking for anything out of place. Took about 40 minutes if I didn't rush it. I was halfway down row C when I heard the knocking. 3 slow knocks. A pause, then 3 more. I stopped walking. The sound was coming from my left, somewhere close. I turned and looked at the units. The doors were all closed, locks in place. The hallway was empty. The knocking came again. Same rhythm. 3, pause, 3. I walked toward it. The sound was coming from Unit 114. I stood in front of the door and listened. The knocking stopped. I waited maybe a minute, nothing. I checked the lock, still secure, no signs of tampering. I pulled out my flashlight and swept it along the base of the door, looking for gaps or damage. The unit was sealed tight. Climate-controlled storage doesn't leave much room for animals to get in, but it's not impossible. Rats, maybe? Possums, if there's a gap somewhere in the back? I knocked on the door myself. 3 times, same rhythm. Felt stupid doing it, but I wanted to see if anything inside would react. Nothing. I stood there another minute, then kept walking. Finished the rest of row C, checked the other rows, came back to the booth. I logged it in the incident report. Possible animal intrusion. Unit 114, row C. Knocking sound heard at 12:34 a.m. No visible entry points. Will monitor. That was it. I didn't call anyone, didn't follow up. I figured if it happened again, I'd deal with it then. It happened again 2 nights later. Same time, same unit. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. I stood outside the door and waited for it to stop. Took longer that time. Maybe 5 minutes of knocking on and off before it finally quit. I logged it again. Same note, different date. The 3rd time, I heard something else underneath the knocking. Faint, muffled. It sounded like a voice. I pressed my ear against the door. The metal was cold. I could hear the knocking clearly now, and beneath it, something low and indistinct. Not words exactly, just the shape of a voice, like someone talking in another room. I stepped back. Checked the lock again, still secure. I went back to the booth and pulled up the file on Unit 114. Genesis Pearson. Autopay active. Since she'd rented the unit, which had been a little over 3 years ago. No missed payments. No contact information beyond an email address and a billing card. The last recorded access was in October, 4 months back, like Tim had said. I sat there looking at the monitor. The camera on row C showed the hallway, empty and still. Unit 114 was just outside the frame. I thought about calling the police. Non-emergency line, just to have someone come check it out. But I wasn't sure what I'd tell them, that I heard knocking from a locked storage unit, that there might be a voice inside. I didn't call that night. I told myself I'd wait and see if it happened again. It did. The next week, same time, same unit. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. And the voice underneath, a little clearer now. Still muffled, still indistinct, but definitely there. I called the non-emergency line. Told the dispatcher I had a possible intrusion at the storage facility. Someone potentially locked inside a unit. She said she'd send a car. 2 officers showed up about 20 minutes later. I met them at the front and walked them back to row C. The woman introduced herself as Officer Richards. Her partner was Officer Fox. Both of them looked tired. It was almost 2 in the morning. I explained what I'd heard. Richards asked if I'd check the unit myself. I told her it was locked, and I didn't have a key. That was technically true. Management had keys, but I didn't carry them on my rounds. Fox asked if the tenant had been notified. I said the tenant was deceased. That got their attention. Richards called it in, got clearance to open the unit. Fox went back to the car and came back with bolt cutters. He cut the lock and I helped him raise the door. The unit was full. Old furniture mostly. A couch, a recliner, a dining table with chairs stacked on top. Cardboard boxes lined the walls, stacked 3 or 4 high. Everything looked dusty, untouched. Richard stepped inside with her flashlight. Fox stayed near the door. I stood in the hallway and watched. She checked behind the furniture, moved a few boxes, looked in the corners. Nothing. No person, no animal. No sign anyone had been inside recently. "You said you heard knocking?" she asked. I told her yes. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. She looked at me, then back at the unit. "You hear it now?" I didn't. The unit was silent. Fox walked in and checked the back wall, knocked on it with his knuckles. Solid, no hollow spaces, no gaps. They stayed maybe 10 minutes poking around, moving things. Then Richards came back out and told me it was empty. No intrusion, no animals. Nothing that would explain the sound. I thanked them. They left. I stood in the hallway looking into the unit. Something felt wrong. I couldn't pin it down. The furniture, maybe, the way it was arranged. Or the dust, which seemed too even, too undisturbed. I pulled the door back down and went to the office to get a new lock. Installed it myself, logged the incident, went back to the booth. The rest of the shift was quiet. I didn't hear anything else from row C. But I kept thinking about the unit, about the voice I'd heard underneath the knocking, about the way the officers hadn't found anything, even though I knew I'd heard something. I told myself it was pipes. Or the ventilation system. Storage facilities make noise. Metal expands and contracts. Ducts rattle. It's normal. I almost believed it. I went back the next night with my flashlight. Not because I wanted to. I'd spent the whole day trying to let it go. Told myself the officers had checked it, found nothing, moved on. That was supposed to be the end of it. But I kept thinking about the unit, about the way it had looked when they raised the door. The furniture arranged just so, the boxes stacked neat against the wall, the dust that hadn't been disturbed. Something felt off. I clocked in at 10, did my first walk at 11:30, skipped row C entirely. Told myself I'd deal with it later, after midnight, when the facility settled and I could think straight. Around 1:15, I grabbed the big mag light from the booth and walked out to the unit. The new lock was still in place. I'd installed it myself 2 weeks back, right after the officers left. Standard padlock, nothing fancy. I pulled the key from my belt and opened it, then raised the door slow. The smell hit me first. Stale air, cardboard, that faint mustiness you get in closed spaces. Normal stuff. I stepped inside and swept the flashlight across the room. Furniture on the left, couch, armchair, a coffee table with scratched up legs. Boxes stacked along the right wall, most of them taped shut. A few open ones near the door. I moved the light over them one by one. Nothing looked different. Nothing I could point to and say, that's it, that's what's wrong. I walked to the back wall and ran the light up and down. Plain drywall, painted beige. A few scuff marks near the floor, where something heavy had been dragged. I moved closer. That's when I saw them. Scratches. Long ones, grouped in sets of 4. Parallel lines running down the wall about 5 feet up. like someone had dragged their fingers through the drywall and just kept going. I stood there staring at them for a good 30 seconds. Furniture, I thought. Someone moved a shelf or a dresser and scraped the wall. Happens all the time. People aren't careful when they're loading units. They bang things around, leave marks. It's normal. Except the scratches didn't look like furniture damage. They were too deep, too deliberate, and they were high up. Higher than you'd expect from something being dragged along the floor. I reached out and ran my fingers over them. The drywall was gouged, torn through the paint down to the bare material underneath. 4 lines, then a gap, then 4 more. I pulled my hand back and turned around. The boxes near the door caught my eye. One of them had fallen open, the flaps bent back. I walked over and crouched down beside it. Photographs, dozens of them, loose inside the box, some in frames, some just printed on cardstock. I picked one up and angled the flashlight over it. A woman in her 60s smiling at the camera. She was standing in a backyard somewhere, wearing a floral blouse and holding a glass of something. Behind her were kids, maybe grandkids, all gathered around a picnic table. Every face had been scratched out, not marked over with a pen, not scribbled on, scratched, gouged down to bare cardboard with something sharp, something that had torn through the photo paper and left ragged edges where the faces used to be. I set it down and picked up another one. Same thing. A family portrait, everyone dressed nice, standing in front of a church. The woman from the first photo was in the center, surrounded by what looked like 3 generations of family. Every face destroyed. Just blank spaces where their eyes and mouths should have been. I went through the whole box. Birthday parties, graduations, holidays. Every single photograph had been defaced the same way. Methodical, precise. Like someone had sat down with a knife or a pair of scissors and worked through them one by one, scraping away every face until there was nothing left but cardboard and torn edges. I put the photos back in the box and stood up. My hands were shaking a little. I didn't want to admit that, but they were. I told myself it didn't mean anything. People do weird things when they're upset. Maybe Genesis Pearson had a falling out with her family. Maybe she'd come here after a bad argument and gone through the photos in a rage. It happens. People get angry, they lash out, they destroy things. Except Genesis Pearson was dead, had been since December, and the photos looked recent. The edges weren't yellowed or faded. The scratches were clean, sharp, like they'd been made not that long ago. I swept the flashlight around the unit one more time. The furniture, the boxes, the scratches on the wall. Nothing else looked out of place. I backed out of the unit, pulled the door down and locked it. Then I stood there in the hallway for a minute, trying to get my breathing under control. It's fine, I thought. It's just a storage unit, just old furniture and boxes. Nothing here that can hurt you. I walked back to the booth and sat down. Logged the inspection in the system. Checked the cameras. Everything was quiet. I didn't go back to row C for the rest of the shift. When I got home that morning, I pulled out my phone and looked up Genesis Pearson. Took me about 10 minutes to find an obituary. She died of a heart attack in December at her home on Lobdell Avenue. Survived by no immediate family. Services held at a funeral home off Greenwell Springs Road. No mention of a storage unit. I set the phone down and sat there on my couch, staring at nothing. The scratches on the wall. the photographs with the faces gouged out, the knocking I'd heard 2 weeks earlier and the voice underneath it. I told myself there was still a rational explanation, that I just hadn't found it yet. I almost believed it. The voice started a week later. I was sitting in the booth around 3:30 in the morning, watching the feeds and drinking coffee that tasted burnt, even when it was fresh. The place was quiet, same as always. I'd just finished logging the midnight walk and was thinking about whether I wanted to bother heating up the sandwich I'd brought when I heard it. Soft, muffled, coming through the wall behind me. "Austin?" I turned around and looked at the wall. Cinder block painted beige, same as the rest of the booth. Nothing there. Just the wall and the metal shelving unit I'd pushed up against it to hold the binders and spare batteries. I sat there and waited. Nothing. I figured I'd imagined it. Lack of sleep, probably. I'd been pulling doubles that week because one of the weekend guys had called out sick and management was scrambling to cover shifts. I turned back to the monitors. "Austin, can you come check on something?" I stopped moving. The voice was coming from the other side of the wall, clear enough that I could make out the words. A woman's voice. Friendly, casual. The kind of tone you'd use if you were asking someone to grab something off a high shelf at the grocery store. I stood up and walked over to the wall, put my hand flat against it. The cinder block was cool under my palm. I didn't say anything. Just stood there and listened. Silence. I waited about 2 minutes. Then I walked outside and did a lap around the booth. The exterior wall backed up to the parking lot. Nothing out there but my car and the dumpster and a street light that flickered every 10 seconds. No one around. No cars I didn't recognize. I went back inside and sat down, pulled up the camera feed for the front lot and scrubbed back through the last 20 minutes. No movement, no one had come in or out. I didn't log it, didn't know what I'd even write. The next night it happened again, same time, 3:30, give or take a few minutes. "Austin?" I was standing by the coffee maker when I heard it. I turned around and stared at the wall. "Can you come check on something in row C?" Same friendly tone, same muffled quality, but clear enough that I knew exactly what she was saying. Row C. Not row B or row D, row C, where unit 1 or 14 was. I didn't answer. Just stood there with the coffee pot in my hand and waited for her to say something else. She didn't. I set the pot down and walked over to the monitors, pulled up the feed for row C. The hallway was empty. All the unit doors were closed. I switched to the camera that covered the entrance to the row. Nothing, no motion, no heat signature on the sensor log. I sat back down and tried to think it through. Someone was messing with me? That was the obvious answer. Someone who knew my name, knew my schedule, knew about the knocking I'd heard in February. Maybe one of the day shift guys playing a prank. Maybe someone who'd rented a unit nearby and had too much time on their hands. It didn't feel right, but I didn't have a better explanation. I pulled up the tenant directory on the computer and started going through the active units in row C. 12 units total. 7 of them were current on payments. I cross-referenced the names with the sign-in logs from the past 2 weeks. Only 3 people had accessed row C in that time. 2 of them had come during the day. The third had signed in at 9 p.m. on a Saturday and stayed for 40 minutes. I remembered him. Older guy, maybe 60, loading boxes into a truck with his son. They'd been polite, efficient, didn't linger. None of them seemed like the type to pull this kind of thing. I kept scrolling and stopped on Unit 114. Genesis Pearson, account active, auto pay current. Last physical access logged 4 months ago. I already knew she was dead. I'd looked her up after I found the photographs, but I hadn't dug into the billing records yet. I opened the payment history and started going through it. Autopay had been set up in August, 2 years earlier. The charges came out on the 1st of every month. $95, pulled from a checking account at a credit union on Government Street. No missed payments, no lapses. The account had kept paying even after she died. I clicked over to the contact information. Phone number on file was disconnected. I'd tried calling it a few days earlier and got a recording saying the line was no longer in service. Email address was an old AOL account. I didn't bother trying that one. No emergency contact listed, no next of kin. I sat there and stared at the screen. The voice came again. "Austin, I need you to check on something." I didn't turn around this time, just kept my eyes on the monitor. "It's in row C. Can you come take a look?" Her tone was patient, almost apologetic, the way someone sounds when they're asking a favor they know is inconvenient but necessary. I closed the tenant file and pulled up the camera feed again. Row C was still empty. I didn't go. The third night, I was ready for it. I'd brought a voice recorder. One of those cheap digital ones you can pick up at an office supply store for $20. I set it on the desk next to the monitors and hit record at 3:15. The voice came through at 3:32. "Austin?" I didn't move. "Just let the recorder run. Can you come check on something in row C? I think there's a problem." I waited. She didn't say anything else. I played the recording back. Static. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. The faint buzz of the monitors. No voice. I played it again. Same thing. I deleted the file and put the recorder back in my bag. The fourth night, I tried ignoring it completely, didn't look at the wall, didn't check the cameras, didn't stop what I was doing. Just kept my head down and worked through my checklist. She called my name 6 times that night. Always the same request. Always row C. I didn't go. By the end of the week, it had become part of the routine. I'd show up at 11, do the first perimeter walk, sit down in the booth and wait. Around 3:30, she'd start talking. I'd keep working. She'd stop after a few tries. I started wearing headphones, played podcasts or music, anything to cover the sound. It didn't help. I could still hear her underneath it. Not louder, just there. Present. The way you can feel someone standing behind you even when you're not looking. I kept showing up because I needed the paycheck. That was the practical reason. The one I told myself every time I clocked in. The other reason, the one I didn't say out loud, was that I hadn't figured out what else to do. Quitting felt like admitting something I wasn't ready to admit. That the knocking had been real. That the scratches and the photographs meant something I didn't want to think about. That Genesis Pearson was still here in some way I couldn't explain and didn't want to accept. So I kept coming in. Kept doing the job. Kept telling myself I'd find a rational explanation eventually. The voice kept calling. I kept not answering. I was 2 hours into the shift when the motion sensor went off. The monitor bank showed 6 feeds at once. Row C was bottom left. I'd been watching it without really watching it, the way you stare at something when you're thinking about other things. The red indicator lit up in the corner of the screen. Motion detected. Zone 7. I leaned forward and checked the frame. Nothing there. The corridor was empty, same as it had been all night. Concrete floor, metal doors, overhead fluorescents throwing that flat yellow light down the length of the row. I could see all the way to the end. Not a person, not an animal, not even a shadow that didn't belong. The sensor blinked off. Then the next one triggered. Zone 8, 1 unit down. I sat up straighter and pulled the monitor closer. The camera angle shifted automatically when the sensor activated. Standard setup. The frame panned right and centered on the door to Unit 116. I watched the empty corridor, waited for something to move into view. Nothing. The sensor stayed active for maybe 5 seconds. Then it went dark and the next one lit up. Zone 9. I didn't touch the controls, just watched. The camera panned again, Unit 1 to 18 now, same empty hallway, same fluorescent lights. The sensor held, then released. Zone 10 triggered. It was moving down the row, 1 unit at a time, steady, methodical, like someone walking the corridor and stopping at each door. But there was nobody there. I checked the timestamp in the corner of the feed. 3:42 in the morning. I'd done my midnight walk an hour ago. Row C had been quiet. All the doors closed. I would have noticed if someone had gone in after that. Zone 11. The camera kept panning, kept centering on empty space. I pulled up the log on the second monitor and scanned the entry records. No gate activity since 10:30. Nobody had checked in. Nobody had used an access code. The facility was locked down. Zone 12 triggered. That was 2 units away from 114. I stood up and reached for my flashlight, checked the battery. It was full. I clipped my radio to my belt even though there was nobody to call. Then I stopped and looked back at the monitor. Zone 13. 1 unit away. The camera panned to Unit 1 to 12. The frame was centered, clear. I could see the lock on the door, could see the number stenciled on the metal, could see the dust on the floor in front of it. The sensor held. Then it blinked off. I waited. 5 seconds, 10. Zone 14 lit up. Unit 114. The camera feed snapped to static. Not black, not frozen, static. The whole screen went to gray and white noise, crackling and shifting like an old TV that lost its signal. The audio feed hissed. I could hear it through the desk speakers, a low buzz that made my teeth hurt. I grabbed the edge of the desk and stared at the screen. The other 5 feeds were fine. Rows A and B, the front gate, the loading zone, all clear, all normal. Just row C, just that one camera cutting out. I reached over and cycled the input. Switched the feed off and back on, static. I checked the connection log. No errors, no disruption. The camera was receiving power. It was transmitting. It just wasn't showing me anything I could use. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds. Told myself it was a malfunction, equipment failure. The cameras were old. The wiring was older. It happened sometimes. But I'd watched the sensors trigger in sequence, watched them move down the row, like something was walking. Watched them stop at 114. I picked up the flashlight and walked out of the booth. The air outside was cooler than I expected. It had been warm earlier, but the temperature had dropped while I was inside. I could see my breath a little. Not much, just enough to notice. I crossed the lot and turned down the access road that led to row C. The overhead lights were motion activated. They came on as I walked, one panel at a time, throwing long shadows across the pavement. I kept the flashlight off. Didn't need it yet. I reached the entrance to row C and stopped. The corridor stretched out in front of me, 30 units, 15 on each side, fluorescents running the length of the ceiling. Concrete walls painted that industrial beige that every storage place uses. I started walking. My boots echoed. The sound bounced off the metal doors and came back flat and hollow. I passed Unit 102, Unit 104, kept going. The lights were all on. Motion sensors had triggered when I entered. Everything was visible, nothing moving. I reached Unit 114 and stopped. The door was open, not halfway, not a crack, all the way up. The roll-up door was raised to full height, locked in place, and the inside of the unit was dark. I stood there and stared at it. I'd checked this row an hour ago. I'd walked past this unit. The door had been closed. I'd seen it on the camera 20 minutes earlier when I did my routine scan. It had been closed then, too. I turned on the flashlight and aimed it inside. The beam cut through the darkness and hit the back wall. The furniture had been moved, not shifted, not knocked over, rearranged. There was a chair in the center of the space facing the door, an old armchair, upholstered in something dark. Floral pattern, maybe. Hard to tell in the flashlight beam. It was positioned like someone had placed it carefully, deliberately. Next to the chair was a lamp. Tall, standing. The cord trailing across the floor to nothing. Not plugged in. Just there. In front of the chair was a small table. Wooden, round. And on the table was a coffee cup. I stepped closer. The cup was white ceramic. No steam, no liquid I could see from where I stood. Just a cup sitting on a table in a storage unit that had been locked and empty for months. I swept the flashlight across the rest of the space. The boxes were still stacked along the left wall. The furniture that had been piled in the back was gone. Not gone. Rearranged. The couch I'd seen during the police inspection was pushed to the side now. The chairs that had been stacked were separated. One of them was the one facing the door. It looked like a living room. Like someone had set up a living room in a storage unit and arranged it to receive a guest. I moved the flashlight down. Footprints. In the dust on the floor. Leading from the back wall to the chair. I could see them clearly. Bare feet. Small. The prints were detailed enough that I could make out the shape of the toes. They tracked across the concrete in a straight line, one step after another, and stopped at the chair. I turned the flashlight back toward the door. No prints coming in, no prints leading out. Just the ones from the back wall to the chair and nothing else. I stood there with the flashlight in my hand and tried to think of an explanation that made sense. Someone had come in, moved the furniture, arranged it, left. But the door had been closed. I'd seen it closed. And there were no footprints at the entrance. I heard my name. Not from inside the unit, from behind me, out in the corridor. Austin. Soft. Clear. The same voice I'd been hearing through the wall for the past week. Austin, stay. I turned around. The corridor was empty. The lights were still on. I could see all the way to the entrance. Nobody there. Please stay. It was coming from somewhere down the row, past where I was standing, toward the far end. I clicked off the flashlight and started walking. Not toward the voice, away from it, back toward the entrance. I didn't run, didn't look back. Just walked at a steady pace, boots hitting concrete, the sound echoing off the walls. Austin. I kept walking. I reached the entrance to row C and turned left. took the access road back to the main lot. My car was parked near the gate. I'd left it there when I clocked in. I got in, shut the door, started the engine. The dashboard clock said 3:58. I put the car in drive and pulled out onto Airline Highway. Didn't stop at the booth. Didn't log out. Didn't lock the gate behind me. Just drove home. I got home around 4:30. The sky was still dark. I parked in the lot behind my building and sat in the car for a minute. Engine off. Hands on the wheel. Then I went upstairs and sat on the couch with the lights on until the sun came up. Around 9, I called Tim. He picked up on the second ring. "Yeah." "It's Austin," I said. "I'm done. I'm not coming back." There was a pause. Not long, just a second or two. Then he said, "All right." That was it, no questions. No surprise in his voice at all. "You knew," I said. "Figured it was coming," he said. "You lasted longer than the last guy." I didn't say anything. "He quit in February," Tim went on. "Same way. Just called one morning and said he was done. Didn't give notice. Didn't come back for his last check. Management had to mail it." "How long did he work there?" 3 years. Give or take. Same as me. That felt important, but I didn't know why. "There was another one before him," Tim said. "I didn't know that guy as well. He was already gone when I started days. But the manager mentioned it once. Said he quit around the same time of year, February, maybe March. Stopped doing his rounds before he left." "Row C," I said. "Yeah." I rubbed my eyes. I hadn't slept, wasn't planning to anytime soon. "You could have told me that," I said. "Would you have believed me?" "Probably not." I didn't answer. "You all right?" Tim asked. "I'm fine," I said. "Just done." "Fair enough." We hung up. I sat on the couch for another hour, then pulled out my laptop and filed for unemployment. The form asked why I was leaving my position. I wrote personal reasons and left it at that. Then I started looking for work. Daytime only. I filtered out anything with evening or overnight shifts. Didn't care what the pay was as long as I'd be home before dark. It took me 3 days to land something. Inventory's position at a warehouse off Segan Lane. They needed someone who could start right away and didn't mind standing on concrete for 8 hours. The pay was worse than what I'd been making at the facility, but the shift ran 7 to 3:30, and the building had windows. I took it. I started the following Monday. The work was simple. Count boxes, scan barcodes, update spreadsheets. My supervisor was a guy named Marcus who didn't ask many questions and didn't care if I kept to myself. I clocked in at 7, took my lunch at 11:30, clocked out at 3:30. Then I went home and stayed there. I didn't think about the facility much during the day. It was easier when I was moving, when there was something in front of me that needed counting or logging. But at night, lying in bed with the lights off, I'd hear it again. Not the voice, just the memory of it. My name in that soft, clear tone. The way it had come from behind me, out in the corridor, even though there was nobody there. I didn't tell anyone what happened, didn't see the point. What was I going to say? That I'd heard a dead woman calling my name from inside a storage unit? That furniture had rearranged itself while I was watching the cameras? Nobody would believe that. I didn't half believe it myself. And I'd been there. I ran into Tim about a month later. I was getting gas at the station off Sherwood, and he pulled up 2 pumps over. We nodded at each other. He finished first and walked over while I was still filling the tank. "How's the warehouse?" he asked. Fine, I said. Quiet. He nodded. Good. We stood there for a second. I almost left it at that. Then I asked, They hire someone new? Yeah, Tim said. Kid in his 20s, started the week after you left. I didn't ask his name, didn't want to know. How's he doing? I said. Tim shrugged. All right, I guess. He's still showing up. I capped the tank and hung up the nozzle. He will be, I said. For a while. Tim gave me a look, not surprised, just tired. Yeah, he said. I got back in my car and drove home. 2 months after that, I saw Tim again. Same gas station. This time he came over before I could finish pumping. New guy quit, he said. I looked at him. Last week, Tim went on. Didn't give notice, just called in one morning and said he wasn't coming back. How long did he last? About 2 months. I nodded. That sounded right. He stopped doing his rounds? I asked. Tim nodded. Manager said he'd been skipping row C for at least a week before he quit. Maybe longer. I pictured it. The kid walking his route, flashlight in hand, reaching the entrance to row C, and just turning around. Going back to the booth. Logging it as complete, even though he hadn't finished. Telling himself it didn't matter. That he'd do it next time. That there was no reason to walk down there in the dark when nothing ever happened anyway. Unit still active? I asked. Yeah, Tim said. Autopay's still running. Management can't figure out where it's coming from. Account's not tied to anyone they can reach. No phone number on file, no forwarding address. Just a name and a routing number that keeps going through every month. Genesis Pearson. I didn't say it out loud. They gonna shut it down? I asked. Tim shook his head. Why would they? Rent's getting paid. Unit's not causing any problems. I almost laughed. Not causing any problems. Right. They hire someone else yet? I asked. Posted the listing yesterday. I nodded, didn't say anything else. Tim looked at me for a second, then walked back to his truck. I finished filling the tank and went home. I still work at the warehouse. It's been over a year now. The pay's still bad and my knees hurt by the end of the day, but I don't mind it. I come in when the sun's up and I leave while it's still light out. I don't work nights. Don't plan to again. Sometimes I drive past the facility on my way home. It's right off Airline, hard to avoid unless I take the long way around. I don't slow down or look too hard, but I see it. The fence. The rows of units stretching back from the road. The cameras mounted on the light poles. It looks the same as it always did. I don't know who's working nights there now. I don't know if they've lasted or if they've already quit. I don't know if they've heard the knocking yet or the voice, or if they've walked down row C and found the door to Unit 114 standing open when it should have been locked. But I know the unit's still there. I know the autopay's still running. And I know that sooner or later, whoever's working that shift is going to hear their name called from somewhere they can't see, in a voice that sounds friendly and patient and wrong. I know because that's how it works. That's the shape of it. I go to work during the day. I come home before dark. I don't think about row C more than I can help. But I know it's still out there. And I know it's still waiting.